Hey everyone, welcome to our Growth Accelerator. My name is Nate Houghton. I'm co-founder of Incendium, and I'm here with Amy Jin, who
Hi.
is a coach. She works on a mindfulness-based leadership coaching practice for founders, leaders, and their teams. She also notes in her LinkedIn bio that she believes there are modern-day heroes, which I deeply appreciate and makes me feel great about myself. So thank you, Amy, for including that as well. Amy was also the all-star kind of senior member of the first sales team that I was ever a part of at Google back in, I'll say the year, maybe we shouldn't, but it was like 2011 and 2012.
Mhm.
I was one of the people I learned quite a bit from when I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, as opposed to today where I have a little bit of an idea of what I'm doing. So great to welcome you, Amy. Thank you for joining us. I'm excited to hear from you and looking forward to chatting.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you for having me. And hello to everyone who's with us. Hello to everyone who might be watching this later. I'm really excited to be here, Nate, and talk about something that I feel like a lot of us are facing, both at work with our clients, with our teammates, with our co-founders, and also facing at home in our personal lives, with our partners, with our friends, our family. And we deal with this all the time. We were never learned this skill. We never were taught this skill, but yet in learning it and in teaching my clients how to do it, I've seen just incredible results in both their business results, their relationships and their trust, the dynamics on their team, and also their own personal self-confidence and their feeling of, oh, wow, I can really make a change here. There's a deep impact I can make by doing this one thing. So that's why we're talking about the skill of repair today. And before I go on, Nate, when you thought like this might be interesting, can you
Yeah.
share a little bit about what was?
Yeah. I think mainly, yeah. I was just about to jump in and say I think this is the first time that I've heard of repair referred to as a skill, which it almost, it certainly is. And just thinking about the relationships that we develop at work and otherwise, it seems as if there tends to mostly be a thought of like most of the work that is done around coaching and interpersonal relationships and leadership is about preventing the types of situations that then require repair. We're really bad at that though, right? And like, even if we're good at it, maybe we get to a place where we only have these rifts every once in a while. But it had never occurred to me before, even though I've probably done it unknowingly, that you can actually make these things better in retrospect. So I was interested to learn a little bit more tactically about how you've coached through that. And yeah, like I said, I was reflecting on some instances where I've had to do this sometimes more successfully than others, and it was interesting to think about.
That's so insightful. Yeah, because what we're really talking about here is conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And conflict is everywhere.
And it's honestly part of the process in some ways, like almost necessary, right? It's almost like it's not all a bad thing. It has to happen.
No, conflict is so powerful. It's transformative. We talk about the performance results we get when we have a diverse team. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't mean just in, backgrounds, but I mean
Right.
in the way we think, emotional diversity. And when we have differences in thinking, inevitably we're going to get conflict. And
Mm-hmm.
that type of debate leads to everything that we want in terms of innovation.
Mm-hmm.
But we all have different conflict styles. We all have different ways that some of us believe that conflict is good. Some of us believe that conflict is bad.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes things get heated.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that that's all okay. And it can be actually productive if we can repair well. Because that
Yeah.
repairing, we're rebuilding trust, we're rebuilding connection, we're actually getting closer to one another. We're actually building psychological safety.
Mm-hmm. And I think like the context, obviously, that we're mostly thinking about here is the move fast and break things world, right? And I think that it's easy to think about breaking the market, right? But you also break the team and your co-founder relationships, and sometimes people you have other types of relationships with as well. Nobody ever talks about going back and fixing it after you broke things, but it's interesting to think about how that can be powerful. So yeah, that was very intriguing to me when I think you sent 3 or 4 topics that we could do. This was one that jumped out for that reason.
Well, let me add some stats. I love research, so let me add some stats to help us kind of really dive into why this is so powerful. Okay, so we have one study, and what we're seeing in from the study is every unaddressed conflict wastes about 8 hours of company time.
The tracks.
Nodding, right? In gossip, more other unproductive activities. It drains resources, it drains morale. And just imagine how many unaddressed conflicts, whether they're big or small,
Yeah.
are in, your team and the people listening, your teams now.
And that's the average is 8 hours.
Yeah.
So a lot of them, the big ones that you remember, you're talking about like a week, right? Like that's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember from some of my experiences too, that's just, it can go around and around and around, and inevitably it can lead to kind of toxicity sometimes.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
For sure.
Okay, here's another one. This study actually went to go try to make quantitative how much
Mhm.
this costs. So they asked
Mhm.
executives to estimate how much avoided conflicts
Mhm.
cost them per day. And
Mhm.
it was about $8,000 per day. Avoiding conflict costs managers $8,000 a day. Okay. And then in addition, unproductive conflict. So we're not avoiding it, but it's unproductive, costing them an additional 8K per day. So that's
Okay.
every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I think that this is such a powerful thing, because imagine being able to shorten that timeline or being able to address these things immediately.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So how do you start on this? Yeah, I guess this maybe that seems like it seems hard, right? But I'm interested in how you tend to approach this with clients, I guess, or like with anyone you talk to about it.
So, one of the reasons I got to this is because I started to notice that almost 90% of the issues that my clients are bringing to me, founders, CEOs, leaders, were around person relationship issues, issues
Sure.
about other people. Even if it showed up as like I got to work in my go to market,
Yeah.
or I got to hire a leadership team,
Mhm.
or my sales numbers are down.
Mhm.
Most of the time, if we actually dug into what they could actually do about the problem, it was oriented around people.
Interesting. Yeah.
Do you agree with that? Do you see what I mean there?
100%. Yeah, I
Okay.
think, well, in my experience, the funniest story about this was just in business school, the first semester, everybody took exactly the same. We did the same cases every day. Everyone did the same
Mm.
case every day. And there were 5 or 6, I should remember this, five or six different classes we did the first semester. And I probably won't remember what all of them are. There's like a finance class, very, very light accounting. They didn't want to subject us to anything too hard. There was operations, marketing, and leadership.
Mm.
And the really interesting thing was that you would read these cases, and the job that you had was to try to, with the class, solve the case. And by the end of it, we started noticing that every case was a lead case. So like we do in operations, and we would think it was about some sort of operational issue or marketing case. And it turns out most of the conclusions that we came to were lead conclusions, because everything ended up being about the people of the company. So
Exactly. I've seen also stats about like the 20 top reasons why startups fail. And if you really look at them, almost all of them are people problems,
sure,
right? Yeah.
sure.
So that when I started to notice it from my clients, I was like, that's really interesting. And then I was like, what's missing here? What is making this so hard?
Mm-hmm.
Because from the outside, as a coach's perspective, you get to see a lot of the like, oh, that seems easy. Have this conversation, deliver this feedback, get these people
Mm-hmm.
together, you know. But as you know from the inside, it's never that easy, or it
Right.
never feels that easy. And what I started to notice was that what we're really practicing as leaders is our skill with other people,
Mm-hmm.
and that includes our skill with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Daniel Goleman's definition of EQ actually covers this really well. There are 5 key skills there, right? There's self-awareness, emotion regulation, empathy, social skills, and motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And I work with my clients on all those things. But what repair does is repair allows us to get out of the drama triangle.
Mm-hmm.
We're no longer in blame. We're no longer thinking this problem is just because this other person is this way.
Mm-hmm.
We are seeing ourselves as part of that system. We're taking responsibility for what we've contributed to either the conflict or the issue or the situation or that person's motivation or
Mm-hmm.
their mistakes or their feelings about the issue. And then we're doing something to move us towards something that we want.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the key thing here, is that repair gets us to back on track. It gets us back into a generative mindset of, well, what can we do? What will we do from this point? What's the commitment we're going to make? What's the change we're going to make? What's the active, with agency and empowered thing that I can do? And by the way, leaders go first,
Right.
right? That can also create a space and environment for you to also join me and for us to
Sure.
make an agreement together.
Makes
So let me
sense.
pause there.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about, so I think one of the interesting things, and we can get into this maybe in a couple of minutes, but just thinking about the different types of relationships that exist. I think we could have a whole conversation about co-founder relationships, right? Which
Oh,
is a
yeah.
really, really interesting one. Um, and then, I would imagine as well, there's a lot of like, I don't know the degree to which employees at early stage companies have boss problems that are like big company boss problems, right? And so I do have to think about that. Like, I think there's a different kind of relationship in an earlier stage company, but for me, it's always felt a little bit easier with a team than it has with my co-founders, which I think is an interesting thing that just pops into my head as we talk about this. So I don't know the degree to which that tracks with other people that you've talked to, but yeah, all of this sounds like it resonates. And I think for a lot of the companies that we work with, it's funny too, you can see it. We're ostensibly hired to help with growth and marketing and sales, but the things that make it hard for us to do our jobs sometimes as consultants for these companies are the same things, just manifesting themselves in different ways.
Hmm.
So maybe something that we need to move isn't moving as quickly as possible. That's probably an interpersonal problem at the company, at the client company. Whether somebody was not empowered appropriately or they were delegated to inappropriately or whatever the case is, I think, or maybe they just don't like each other, right? So I think like a lot of that does seem to happen, which does strike me as well.
Or they had a misunderstanding that they never cleared up,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
That's also an example of where repair is relevant.
Yeah.
You said something really interesting. You said, "Hey, for me, it feels easier sometimes with my team than with my
Mhm.
co-founders."
Mhm.
And I think that's really fascinating. I don't know if you'd be willing to share more about that, but before you do, I wanted to add that for some people, it's the other way around,
Yeah,
because the other thing at play here is power dynamics.
exactly.
Right. I have a lot of founders where it's really easy for them to go to their co-founder, but it's difficult for them to go to somebody who they perceive as having, they have the authority with, because they
Right.
feel bad and they don't want that person to feel rejected and they have this extra responsibility.
Mhm.
Or their relationship with their investor is the one that's difficult because they're
Mhm.
in the, perceived lower role, reporting into role. So there's definitely a mix here.
Those are the only ones that make sense to me. And I think part of it is that I think I know there's a I think the power dynamics are unclear in a co-founder relationship, and that's where I struggle because it's hard
Hmm.
for me to figure out. And so if it's somebody who works for me, there is definitely a power dynamic that exists there. Absolutely, like you can hire and fire people. I think that it is clear to me that everyone knows that, and it is clear to me how to use that to be empathetic and selfless and put others first. That's
Hmm.
very easy for me. I think like that's, not that I always do a good job, and I'm sure there are plenty of people watching who would tell you that I don't, but I think generally speaking, like that's just easier for me to it's easier for me to have a hard conversation with someone who works for me. I have no idea usually how to do that with a co-founder. I think, and frankly, I'm a very bad co-founder, right? I think I'm very hard to work with in some ways. I move really fast. I do quite a lot all the time.
Hmm.
Extremely hyperactive,
Hmm.
and but it doesn't feel to me as if I have the agency to say something is wrong here when it's a co-founder. If it's an investor or if it's someone who works for me, I actually do. I think that's if somebody works for me and they're doing something wrong, I'll tell them. It's like that's why we're here. That's what we're doing. And then you can sort of back into doing that with empathy and you end up in a better place than they might have expected. If it's an investor, I maybe earlier in my career that was a little bit harder, but now I think I think there's actually an elevated dynamic there that makes it a little bit easier too. When it's someone who's a peer, that's a little trickier. And I don't know the degree to which this is true for other entrepreneurs as well, but that's a tricky one because it's hard to know exactly what door I'm walking into, what that relationship.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So okay, first, quick question. How about with customers for you?
I'm really good at being very, very honest with customers. And I think it's actually sort of become part of our brand. And I think it works really well for us because like I deliver bad news a lot. And so they actually trust us. That said, it is always difficult when you have a financial relationship that you need to preserve. And I think we need to, I think that definitely when things are going well for us, it's a lot easier to have an honest conversation about what somebody should be doing, even if that's not working with us. And I think on the net, I would say we do a far better job than almost any service provider does. And I think our customers would say the same thing. That said, it is still a little tricky sometimes, but I think compared to the mean, we're definitely a couple standard deviations above that. Yeah.
If I were your customer, I would really appreciate that.
They tend to in the long run. And I think a lot of them work with us for later, again,
Mhm.
probably largely as a result of that. And I think we want to deliver unbiased analysis for sure.
But what I'm noticing, Nate, is that you have sort of very clear models. I think I'm going to call them models or schemas for
Totally.
how to speak to and your role with investors, customers, and people who report to you. And you haven't yet really found a clear one for your co-founders.
Or someone I work for. I have no idea how to do that. And I never have figured that out, which is why I'm an entrepreneur.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, fascinating.
It
So,
is like a degree of paralysis that I actually have had jobs where I've been sitting there for hours trying to figure out how to have a conversation with a peer or with a boss. I cannot do it. It just doesn't track for me.
Okay, one more question. What about with friends?
No, I don't have hard conversations with friends at all. And frankly, some of this is just like men. I don't think we'll just like watch a football game, but yeah. So I really don't have hard conversations with friends. I'd say my family, generally speaking, we probably don't have as many hard conversations as we should, just historically. I think that's a piece of it. But for whatever reason, when I'm in a situation where somebody works for me,
Yeah.
it clicks, and that is a relationship that for some reason I understand and I can do.
Okay. What I'm going to suggest as an idea, I don't know if this is going to be helpful for you or not, but what I'm going to suggest as an idea is that as leaders, and when we tap into like who we're being as a leader, that idea that leaders go first, right? Or that we are, especially in your instance of how you probably are with your direct reports, where you're leading so empathetically. And the radical candor model, for example, is the ability for us to say what needs to be said to somebody because we really have their best interest at heart. I'm going to suggest that all that remains the same no matter what power dynamic we're in and who we're speaking to.
Interesting. Yeah.
And when we go to repair is amazing because it's different from just giving constructive feedback, right? It's different from saying like, here's something that I saw you do. Here's the behavior. Here's the impact, right? Repair is starting with ourselves. Right. Repair is saying, and actually, let me go ahead and break down kind of the 3 steps so we can work with it a little bit. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the 3 steps of repair are: number 1, acknowledge what happened. Right. This is something. So let's make a real example. Let's say that it is that somebody on my team has not delivered something on time, and maybe it's even the 4th or 5th time they've done it. Okay, and I'm getting frustrated. And they didn't deliver it, and they also didn't communicate that it was going to be late. So I just got like radio silence. This is really relatable, right?
we tend to avoid it. I think it's pretty clear pretty quickly when you work here that like that it's not going to work. But yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So repair. So constructive feedback would be, hey, I'm going to say, hey, Jane, I've noticed that these 3 times you've been late, and et cetera, and here's the impact.
Yeah.
Repair would be, hey, Jane, I want to acknowledge that we've been in a situation where the work that you've delivered is late, and that I haven't created a situation or an environment or the conversation needed to really make this change.
Interesting. Yeah.
That probably is frustrating for you, or I don't actually know, but you can even say, in this case, it's interesting, but sometimes that person deserves an apology from us.
Right.
Right. So I apologize for the situation that we're in and my contribution to it. I recognize the impact it's having on all of us. And here's what I'm going to do from this moment forward to make sure that this doesn't happen again. That is a very situational example.
But it's actually really interesting because that actually explains why, to me, it feels easy to do that with someone who works for me. Because I do genuinely believe that if someone is not doing their best work, it is at least partially my fault.
Yes.
And I think people know that because they have not been put in a position. And that's harder for me for whatever reason with someone like a co-founder or a boss, because I'm like, I don't know, like, you're in charge of yourself here. But I feel like there's a very sacred kind of responsibility when somebody works for you that you need to enable them to succeed. And sometimes the biggest thing is to move them into a role where their talents are better utilized. And that's your fault, like that's on you. So I think that to me is clearer, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Let me finish that real quick because I just want to make sure that there's 2 other steps that we take here, which is, here's what I need, here's what I cannot do, and here's an agreement that we need to make. And are you willing to keep your side of the agreement? maybe I had expectations that I had of you that you would communicate, and it's my responsibility to make those clear. But let's
Mhm.
move into a place of agreement so that we're both creating the workflow that we need. And
Mhm.
you have to tell me if it works for you. Okay. Now, Nate, let's move into the one where you have a little more trouble, which is with your co-founders, right?
Sure.
So can we imagine a situation where something is a little off or there's a conflict that hasn't been addressed?
Yeah, and I'm thinking in a couple of months ago there was one, and it's one of the instances I can think of where I think this actually did happen effectively.
Hmm.
And part of the reason for it is like I actually messed up, and that was simpler for me.
Yeah.
So it was like, I messed up, and and it was very clear that I could acknowledge that. I think the times that seem harder are where it is harder for me to grasp exactly what it is that I would change. And I suppose the thing I would get to is there probably needs to be a stronger understanding of what people's various responsibilities are and what what they need to be doing or what the expectations are, right? But
Hmm.
I think it was easy in one sense when I think I just did something wrong or I said something I shouldn't have said, right? That was pretty simple. It was
Hmm.
very easy to pinpoint, like, this is something that I did, I can't do that again. And that went really well because I think it was clear. Yeah.
So am I hearing you correctly that the ones that are more challenging for you are when you maybe didn't do anything that really, you know, that you see that caused the thing and it was maybe a gaffe on your co-founder's part and you don't know how to address that?
It's more like founding doesn't have a great job description, right? I think you sort of like you're doing a lot, and I think co-found, yeah, and it's pretty easy for me. Like if I was to, and I've done this before too. If I'm a solo founder, it's like, well, yeah, that's you. That's your job. But when there isn't a good conversation around like these are the things that I'm going to do, and these are the things that you're going to do, and then to some extent the equitability of those things changes over time as the company changes too. And so I think that those are conversations that if it's clear that someone thinks that they're contributing more in a way than otherwise, right? I think like those are conversations that I've talked to people are very hard to have. Is all of these relationship dynamics change, people's skill sets become more and less valuable as companies grow.
Mm.
People's ideas of what they want to do or what they're interested in change because we're all human and they change over time. And that
Mm.
means that maybe the things that we agreed 3 years ago that I was going to be responsible for, you were going to be responsible for, is no longer any way good for the company.
Mm.
And that's not as easy to pinpoint as like I was a jerk. Like
Right.
that's a really easy conversation for me to have because it's very, very clear versus like circumstances beyond our control have changed things. And
Yeah.
like that seems a little more ambiguous or wishy-washy. And I think that our brains tend to go to like, oh well, this person sucks. And it's like, and that's not the
Ah.
case. It's just that other things have changed. So I think the model is a really good one, but that does help break down why that would be a little trickier.
Let me suggest something, and you tell me how it might float in this situation, okay?
Yeah.
Because I think this might be a kind of crucial conversation, which is I think repair is in the umbrella of. But
Hmm.
let me float this idea with you, and let me tell me what you think. Which is, you sit down and you say, "Hey, co-founder, I want to acknowledge that the roles that we set out 3 years ago are probably not working now, and I want to take
Hmm.
responsibility for the fact that I haven't brought this up sooner."
Yeah.
And I think no one's at blame here, but I
Right.
think it's time to do that. And here's what I would like to propose that we do.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
that's
I think that's helpful. And it's funny, I think getting to that model eventually has over time helped me to be much more grateful. And I think I have a
Mm,
very good relationship with co-founders and people I've worked with, but I had to kind of go through that process, right? And we've been working on Incendium, for 8 or 10 years, right? So I think like these things just they kind of evolve over time. But I do know I deal with a lot of co-founders. It's actually interesting. I often just deal with this is useful. I deal with just one of them because like one of them will handle growth, and it actually is kind of a more interesting window than if you dealt with both of them. So I do think these kinds of conversations are really pretty prevalent.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay. So that's one way
that's
you
interesting.
could. So I
Yeah.
guess what we're revealing here is that repair is a way to approach a conversation, to open a
Yes.
conversation, right? Because when I'm imagining, anyone listening to this, or when you receive somebody approaching you like that, as
Mhm.
opposed to, hey, we need to talk and there's a problem,
Exactly.
right? It's like, oh, you're modeling. First of all, the nervous system is calm.
Mhm.
You, the person doing the repair, is modeling a sense of 100% responsibility for this thing, which I
Mhm.
think also kind of conveys the other person you can take 100% responsibility too, and it's not about blame. and we're
Absolutely.
just here to fix the thing.
Yeah,
Okay, I wanna push a little further on this just to make it a little more juicier, a little spicier,
sure.
okay?
And we have a couple minutes left, but we can
This
run
will be
through
really
something.
quick.
By the way, I do think we can continue the conversation as well. I think this is an interesting series for sure. Yeah.
Okay, really quick. Another
Mhm.
thing you could say is, "Hey, co-founder, I've noticed things haven't changed, our roles and responsibilities. And by the way, I want to own that I've been over here sometimes blaming you for that.
Mhm.
And that's something I'm going to stop doing." Right? That's like a little bit more revealing.
It is, and it is interesting in talking through this, and this I think mirrors some good conversations from earlier in the year. I think it is interesting the power of owning something
Yes.
with that, right? That is very, very useful. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, last few minutes.
Yeah. So I think this is something, I guess maybe my last question would be, and maybe your answer is it's gonna be hard for you to answer this because like we'll just do it. But do you have any very tactical tips on like, I guess we can talk about co-founders or we could talk about anyone at startups, I think in particular, how they might approach a conversation like this or anything that they might want to look out for that might not be obvious.
So the first thing is you want to check with yourself, and I would write the script. So like I'll send a 1, 2, 3 after this, like here, like literally it's like a Mad Libs, right? Like
Yeah.
fill it in so you get clear, right?
Interesting.
And you might have some anger or resentment around that. Like process that with, a friend, your coach, someone else, because
Mhm.
when you come into these, the tone and your body language are also going to be what you communicate with. Okay.
Yes.
And so we want to get you some kind of grounding first and then go into the conversation. If it's your first time, you can say to your co-founder or whoever, "Hey, I want to try something new with you. It's this new skill I'm practicing. I may be very clumsy,
Very cool.
but
Yeah.
it's something that I think will really help us and our entire company. Are you willing to let me try?"
That's cool. Very cool idea. Yeah, writing it down is a great example of something I would never think to do, but it's just so obvious to actually do. That makes a lot of
Writing
sense.
helps us think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool. Good stuff, Amy. Thank you. This is
Oh,
great. This is even
thanks
more
for
interesting than
having
I thought it
me.
would be. I appreciate it.
Good. Thank you
Um,
for being my partner.
yeah, happy to go through it. Hope everyone enjoyed this. We'll post this on LinkedIn as well, so we can watch it back later, and we'll have some clips too. Maybe we'll have a follow up conversation too. But thanks, Amy. Really appreciate it.
Wonderful.
Talk to you again
My
soon.
pleasure. Take care.
See ya.